Welcome to Cloud Automation Guide, where we simplify DevOps, cloud, and automation for everyone. In this video, you'll learn how to create projects in VMware Aria Automation, a core building block that defines who can deploy, what infrastructure they can access, and how deployments are governed. Whether you're managing internal dev teams, production workloads, or staging environments, projects help you keep everything secure, organized, and efficient. Let's dive right in. First off, what is a project? A project is a logical grouping of users, cloud zones, and configuration settings that forms the scope of deployments in Aria Automation. Everything from templates, deployments, policies, and extensibility actions is associated with a project. If you think of cloud accounts as where and templates as what, projects will answer the question, who can do it and within what boundaries? So for creating this project, first thing we have to do is we have to log into our Aria Automation portal. So make sure you log in with an account that has permissions to be able to create projects. Typically, it'll be an organization owner and somebody who at least has an assembly administrator rights. Once you're in, click on Assembler, click the Infrastructure tab, and click Projects. From here, all you have to do is click New. Give it a name. Give a description if you'd like. Next, you have users. Users are the people that you're going to add into your Aria Automation project. These users are provided by VMware Identity Manager or Workspace ONE Access. They are the ones that are synchronized through there and then made available to Aria Automation for inclusion in projects. You have two options. You have users and groups. If you click on users, you have the option to either provide your own CSV list, which you can either manually type it in or you can read from a file, or you can actually search for them directly. So in this case, I'm just going to search for one. This is my domain user account. And then I also want to put in my default admin on this project. So type it and click. Then you get to choose which level of role that you want to assign them within this project. It's pretty self-explanatory. I'm just going to go ahead and choose the administrator role. Once done, click Add. Once you're done adding the users, you can still also add groups. Here you have to search for groups. So I'm going to search for my domain admins. And then I'm going to assign a role. Once that's done, you then have the option for how deployments within the project are going to be able to be viewed by the members of that project. By default, administrators will see everything. But if I was to add a user, let's change this user from an administrator to a member, and this box was not checked. This user that is a member would only be able to see the deployments that they provision. But if you check the box, then all users are able to see all deployments that are made by this project. This setting is helpful if you have, say, support teams that need to be able to access all virtual machines within their group. But if you've got like something that's, say, maybe it's for development purposes that an individual user may be the only one that's supposed to have access to, within the group, you've got, say a team of 15 people, but they're basically deploying their own virtual machines, and you have security requirements which dictate that they should only be able to access their machines and nobody else's, then you would uncheck this box. Rather than creating a project for every individual user, you create one project, uncheck this box, and then basically now you have isolation of virtual machines only being visible to the users that created them. Once you're done with adding users and groups and setting their permissions, then you go to the provisioning. This is where, if you've either seen my articles or watched my other video on creating cloud accounts and cloud zones, this is how you actually link the users that you're wanting to use Aria Automation to the actual cloud zones to where they can actually provision resources. So to do that, you click Add Zone. We're going to click Cloud Zone, and you search for the cloud zone that you want to provide access to. In this case, I'm going to choose my demo cloud zone. And then from here, you can set a few things. One of them is provisioning priority. Basically, the lower the number, the higher the priority. So if I was to want to add multiple cloud zones to this project, but I wanted one of those cloud zones to be uh, the preferred um, place for deployment, then say for this one, I would give it a 0. The other cloud zone that I add, I may give it a 1, I may give it a 100. It doesn't matter. The higher the number, the lower the priority. So the higher priority cloud zone, or the lower number, is the one that will get deployed to first. Also, at the project level, you can say on this particular cloud zone, this project, it's not per user, it's project, can deploy X number of instances maximum. Once they hit that limit, no more machines can be deployed to this particular cloud zone by this project. Same thing with memory, CPU, and storage. Those are all set here at the project level, but they apply only to this particular cloud zone, not every single cloud zone. If you want to set some sort of limits of that, every cloud zone you add, you have to configure limits here. For this example, I'm not going to configure any limits. Placement policy, it's similar to on our cloud zone. This is kind of basically doing the placement policy across cloud zones that you add here. Resource tags, these are tags which you are going to apply to all of the machines that are provisioned this. Typically, this is something that's used for um, it's a tag value that's kind of used for monitoring purposes, nothing more. Like you could, if you deployed the VMs with these tags, and let's just call this, let's say this was the dev project, you could add a tag to it and say, environment dev, right? This is not a capability tag as we've seen in other examples of being able to assign capability tags to resources. This is merely a tag that gets applied to the virtual machine. And then you would have something, say, with Aria operations for monitoring. You could create dashboards and application groups and etc. based upon tags that are on the virtual machine. And this is the tag. This is where you would place that tag from the project level. Constraints, you can, within the project, you can actually constrain deployments that are deployed for this project based upon capability tags that are assigned to those objects. And those objects are networks in Aria Automation, storage, and extensibility constraints applies to if you were to do something like multi-tenancy with Aria Orchestrator. In other words, you have multiple Aria Orchestrator appliances deployed. You have them added as additional endpoints or integrations. You would then create a capability tag on each one of those orchestrator endpoints. And then if you configured the extensibility constraint here, that means that whenever, say, an orchestrator action needed to be executed or an orchestrator workflow needed to be executed for this particular project, then that particular orchestrator server is what would be used, the one that matches the extensibility constraint. Custom properties, you can add custom properties to virtual machines. One that I had mentioned in another was, on cloud zones, you have the ability to dictate which folder every virtual machine that is deployed to that cloud zone, which virtual machine folder in vCenter it goes to. Here is another level where you can do some sort of a similar thing, but it's not constricted or constrained only to the virtual machine custom property, the folder name custom property, which is, folder name equals, and then, my VM folder. This would be, means that when a virtual machine for this project gets deployed, this custom property of this name gets set with this value. Um, this particular custom property is actually a built-in custom property, which sets, which VM folder in vCenter the machine gets created in. But you could have something else like name and you could say, it'd be name of VM. This is not something that you would do necessarily because then every single virtual machine would be named the same and you would have stuff fail. But, you could just say server type and you could just say, let's call this test. So every VM that gets deployed would have a custom property created on it called server type, and its value would be test. Um, I will say though that I've seen this used a lot is the folder name, and then you could call this demo project. And then what would happen is in vCenter, I would actually get, let me log back in, but I would actually get a VM folder here created called demo project. And then everything I deployed to this project would be created in that folder. So that's how that works. Custom naming, it used to be that you could set custom naming here. That's actually in another place here called custom names where you can create a basically a naming standard to be applied to every single virtual machine. And then in that custom name section, you would specify the projects that are participating or whether it's the entire organization. And then you would see that reference here. Request timeouts. This is if, for every single phase, when you request a virtual machine and disks and networks as part of a cloud template, each one of those resources has to go through what's called a machine lifecycle phase. It's been requested, it's being allocated, it's being approved, it's being the resource is being created or provisioned, destroyed, etc. There's a whole list of them. You can find more information about that in the extensibility piece. But each one of those phases has a default timeout value. However, for some projects, they may be like, for instance, at the machine provision phase, they may be running an orchestrator workflow. Some projects may be running workflows that don't take very long. You don't need to extend the default timeout. If you do have, say, some long running workflows that, for a specific project, you can come in here and you can change the timeout values that apply only to this project. But what you have to be careful of is that these timeout values apply to every single phase that occurs within the deployment of those resources. So it's a fine balance between, we want to make sure that the Aria automation timeout threshold is not met, which allows these longer running automation phases to execute without failing arbitrarily. But at the same time, we don't want to make them so long, so that way, if we do have a failure and it hasn't failed hard, it may be stuck in a loop. We don't want it to wait for forever. Something that you'll have to evaluate on your own, but that's pretty much what this is for, is to be able to create a per project custom timeout threshold. This is some stuff for Terraform. We're not going to get into it for this piece. If you have Kubernetes that you're taking advantage of, whether it's Tanzu or Kubernetes, this is where you would create it here. But that's out of scope for this example. Once you are done with everything here, you just click create. And once you've created it, you're pretty much done. So a few tips that I've learned is basically it's best to create separate projects. Or projects are typically created around organizational teams or boundaries, but also at the same time, if you have one team that does, for whatever reason, is responsible for doing dev, test, and production, create separate projects for that team for those functions. It helps isolate those virtual machines, so that way somebody doesn't inadvertently, you know, do something with a prod system that they're been doing with a dev. So it kind of helps do that. Another thing to consider is try to avoid adding users themselves to projects, just like with Active Directory, LDAP, identity management. Try to use groups wherever possible. If you need to, so like we showed on the monitoring where you could add tags, adding tags to virtual machines, especially for monitoring out of the box, is actually a really good idea, a really good use case. So that way things can be monitored. as well as if there's any custom properties that you need to add, even if it's just for asset management tracking purposes, you can use the custom properties and add them so that way those properties are added to the virtual machines by default. Uh, Make sure that I didn't really touch on it, but use your descriptions. It's easier to describe things, come up with a framework for how you're going to do things, add descriptions wherever possible. As the environment gets larger and you get more projects and you get more cloud templates and so on and so forth, be descriptive in your descriptions. It sounds kind of redundant, but they're easy to overlook and not include. And then 6 months, 9 months, 18 months later, when you're looking for something and can't find it, or you're wondering, what is this for, right? Descriptions will save you a lot of time and headache. So that's pretty much it for creating projects. Thank you for watching. If you found this guide helpful, please give it a like and hit that subscribe button for more VMware Aria automation walkthroughs. For step-by-step blog posts, downloadable templates, automation blueprints, and content for Aria Automation, as well as Aria Orchestrator, please head over to cloudautomationguide.com. Up next, we're going to be jumping into image mappings and flavor mappings, where we standardize operating system templates and VM sizes for consistent deployments. See you then.